In Las Vegas, a cocky showman was about to push his bravado too far. A martial arts exhibition meant for cheers and spectacle turned deadly serious when Bill Superfoot Wallace mocked a legend's Roundhouse as slow and outdated. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical celebrity guest. For decades, he was a six-time world karate champion and U.S. Air Force veteran, known for redefining American martial arts, with a roundhouse that ended fights before they began. When Wallace challenged him in front of thousands, daring him to prove the roundhouse still mattered, he had no idea he was facing the master of efficiency itself. Norris's quiet, measured acceptance would trigger not just a physical knockout, but a spiritual one that shattered pride as cleanly as concrete. What began as a flashy exhibition would become a masterclass in humility. The Las Vegas crowd would never forget the night Bill Wallace's arrogance met Chuck Norris's perfect roundhouse and was knocked out in one kick. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Las Vegas, 1,983 neon sliced through cigarette smoke as the packed arena buzzed with anticipation. 3,000 bodies pressed together in the dimly lit space, their collective energy building like a gathering storm. Camera flashes punctuated the darkness like lightning, illuminating the central ring where tonight's martial arts exhibition would unfold. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice cut through the murmurs, deep and theatrical. Welcome to the martial arts spectacular of '83. His sequin jacket caught the spotlight as he gestured broadly to the crowd. Tonight, the greatest fighters in America gather to demonstrate the height of human capability. The audience erupted, their roar washing over the ring in waves. In the front row, Chuck Norris sat motionless, his eyes steady beneath the rim of his cowboy hat. Unlike the flashy celebrities around him, he wore a simple black button-down, open at the collar. No entourage surrounded him. No photographers hovered nearby. At 43, the lines around his eyes had deepened, etched by desert sun and countless hours of training. His hands, calloused and steady, rested lightly on his knees. And now, the announcer continued, his voice climbing with practiced excitement. Put your hands together for the man they call the fastest feet in the fight game, Bill Superfoot Wallace. The crowd surged to their feet as Superfoot Wallace burst into the arena. At 38, Wallace's body was a coiled spring of lean muscle. His blonde hair gleamed under the lights as he bounded toward the ring, arms raised in triumph before he'd even begun. His white gi was emblazoned with sponsor patches, and gold-trimmed black belt wrapped tightly around his waist. "Come on, Vegas," Wallace shouted, leaping onto the edge of the ring. "You ready to see some real speed tonight?" He spun dramatically, pointing at different sections of the crowd. "I can't hear you." The audience responded with thunderous applause. Wallace fed on their energy, his smile widening as he bounced on his toes, shadowboxing for the nearest camera crew. In the front row, a trio of veteran fighters, contemporaries of Norris from the tournament circuit, exchanged knowing glances. One leaned toward another, murmuring something that made them both smirk. Their eyes drifted to Norris, who remained impassive, watching Wallace's display without reaction. For those who don't know, the announcer continued, Bill Superfoot Wallace is the undefeated world middleweight champion. His left roundhouse kick has been clocked at, are you ready for this, folks? 60 miles per hour. That's faster than the legal speed limit. Wallace responded by launching into a dazzling display of flexibility, lifting his leg in a vertical split that brought his foot well above his head. The crowd gasped appreciatively as he held the position, arms extended, grinning at their reaction. "Show off," muttered one of the veteran fighters, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Wallace transitioned into his demonstration, facing an assistant who held a thick pad at chest height. With mechanical precision, Wallace unleashed a barrage of lightning-fast kicks, each one snapping against the target with a sharp crack that echoed through the arena. Left, right, spinning back kick. Then his signature move. The left roundhouse that seemed to materialize out of nowhere, too fast for untrained eyes to track. "Did you see that?" The announcer's voice pitched higher with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, that's why they call him Superfoot." Wallace played to the crowd, beckoning for more noise as he prepared for another combination. The assistant braced himself, pad held high. This time, Wallace added theatrical flair, a feint, a shout, then 3 rapid-fire kicks that sent the assistant stumbling backward. The crowd roared their approval. "That's enough of that, Bobby," Wallace said into the sudden microphone thrust toward him, dismissing his assistant with a casual wave. "Let's give these people something to really talk about." He turned to the crowd, voice carrying through the sound system. "Who wants to see me break some boards?" The response was deafening. Assistants rushed forward with stacks of pine boards as Wallace rolled his shoulders, maintaining eye contact with the closest camera. He pointed directly into the lens. "This is what real power looks like, folks. No camera tricks, no second takes." In the front row, Norris shifted slightly, the first movement he'd made since Wallace entered the ring. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly as he watched the younger fighter prepare. "Now, folks," the announcer interjected, "we also have some very special guests with us tonight." He gestured toward the front row. 6-time world karate champion and star of films like Lone Wolf McQuade, the legendary Chuck Norris. A spotlight swung toward Norris, who acknowledged the announcement with a slight nod. The crowd's response was immediate respectful applause mixed with excited shouts. Several people stood, trying to get a better view of the martial arts icon. Wallace paused in his preparations, glancing toward Norris. Something flickered across his face, a calculation, a decision being made. He looked back at the boards his assistant held, then again at Norris. A slow smile spread across his face. "Hold up," Wallace said, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "I think we need to pay proper respect to the legend." He gestured toward Norris with exaggerated deference. "I mean, he was breaking boards when I was still in diapers, right?" A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the crowd. The veteran fighters in the front row exchanged glances again, sensing the shift in atmosphere. One of them leaned forward, eyes locked on Wallace. The announcer, sensing potential drama that could elevate the exhibition, moved closer. "Ladies and gentlemen, 2 of America's greatest martial artists in one place. What are the odds?" "Pretty good odds in Vegas," Wallace quipped, drawing more laughter. "But I'm feeling lucky tonight." His eyes never left Norris, who remained still, expression unchanged. "Before I continue," Wallace said, his voice dropping to a performative hush that somehow carried through the arena, "I just want to say what an honor it is to be in the same room as Chuck Norris." He paused, letting the moment hang. "I grew up watching his tournaments. Those slow, powerful roundhouses." He emphasized the word slow, letting it linger. The tension in the room thickened. Even the announcer seemed uncertain how to proceed, glancing between Wallace and Norris. "But that was then," Wallace continued, his voice rising again, reclaiming the energy of the room. "And this—" He spun suddenly, delivering a blindingly fast kick that shattered the waiting boards with a crack like a gunshot. "This is now." The crowd erupted, but their reaction was mixed, excitement tinged with discomfort. Some cheered wildly for the display of skill, while others murmured among themselves, eyes darting between Wallace and the still-seated Norris. Wallace wasn't finished. He gestured for another stack of boards, thicker this time. "You know," he said conversationally as his assistant arranged them, "the game has changed since the old days. It's about speed now. Precision. That old-school roundhouse? He shook his head with mock sadness. Too slow for today's fighters. Too predictable. In the front row, one of the veteran fighters stood up slightly, as if preparing to intervene. But Norris raised his hand almost imperceptibly. The man settled back, jaw tight. Wallace set his stance, eyes again finding the camera. "This is for all you old-school guys," he announced, then exploded into motion, destroying the stack with another perfect kick. He landed in a fighting stance, arms raised triumphantly as wood fragments scattered across the mat. The announcer rushed forward, sensing both opportunity and danger. "Ladies and gentlemen, what a display of skill from Bill Superfoot Wallace." And now, Wallace wasn't ready to relinquish the spotlight. He took the microphone directly from the announcer's hand, his breathing controlled despite the exertion. "You know what would really give these people their money's worth?" His eyes found Norris again. A little friendly competition between generations. The crowd's response was immediate, and electric gasps, cheers. The sudden buzz of possibility rippling through the arena. The announcer, seeing the potential for something memorable, jumped in. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting, Superfoot?" Wallace's smile widened, eyes never leaving Norris. "I'm just saying, people came here to see the best. And I respect Chuck Norris. I really do." He paused, letting the tension build. "But that signature roundhouse of his? The one everyone talks about?" Another pause. "It might have been something in the 70s. But today? It's slow. Outdated." The words hung in the air like smoke. Several people in the front row glanced nervously at Norris, who remained still, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. But those who knew him well, the veterans who had fought alongside him, recognized the slight tightening around his eyes. Wallace either didn't notice or didn't care. He was riding the wave of the crowd's energy, feeding off their reaction. "So, what do you say, Chuck?" he called out, deliberately using Norris's first name. "Want to show these people your famous roundhouse? Or would you rather leave it to the history books where it belongs?" The arena fell suddenly, dramatically silent. 3,000 people, holding their breath, as they waited for Norris's response. Chuck Norris sat motionless in the front row, Wallace's words still hanging in the air between them. The silence stretched 1 second, 2, 3, as the arena held its collective breath. Even the announcer seemed frozen, microphone half raised, uncertain how to proceed. Wallace stood center ring, chest rising and falling steadily, a confident smile fixed on his face. Sweat glistened on his forehead under the harsh lights, but his eyes remained locked on Norris. Challenging. The shattered remnants of pine boards lay scattered at his feet like broken promises. "What do you say, Chuck?" Wallace repeated, the microphone amplifying his voice through the hushed arena. "One legend to another, show these people that old roundhouse of yours. Let them decide if it still holds up." In the front row, the veteran fighters shifted uncomfortably. One of them, Dave Hebler, a burly man with a thick mustache who had trained with Norris for years, leaned forward, his knuckles white against the armrest of his seat. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered to his companion. The announcer, sensing the delicate balance of the moment, stepped forward with professional smoothness. "Ladies and gentlemen, what an exciting suggestion. Of course, Mr. Norris is here as our honored guest tonight, not as a performer." "Scared?" Wallace interrupted, his voice cutting through the announcer's diplomatic efforts. The words sliced through the arena like a blade. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Camera flashes intensified, capturing the moment for tomorrow's newspapers. The announcer's smile faltered as he glanced nervously between the two martial artists. Norris finally moved. Slowly, Deliberately, he removed his cowboy hat and handed it to the person beside him. His face remained composed, but something had changed in his eyes, a shift from observation to focus. He stood up, the movement unhurried yet precise, like a mountain deciding to walk. The crowd reacted immediately, scattered applause building to a crescendo, punctuated by excited shouts. The announcer, recognizing the potential for both spectacular entertainment and potential disaster, rushed to capitalize on the moment. Well, folks, this is unexpected. Could we actually be witnessing a spontaneous demonstration between two martial arts legends? He gestured dramatically toward Norris, who was now making his way toward the ring steps. Chuck Norris, 6-time world karate champion and star of some B-movies, Wallace cut in, drawing nervous laughter from parts of the crowd. But tonight, no stunt doubles, no second takes. Right, Chuck? Norris paused at the ring steps, looking up at Wallace. Their eyes met across the distance. Wallace's gleaming with challenge, Norris's steady and unreadable. Without breaking that gaze, Norris removed his watch and slipped it into his pocket. The deliberate nature of the gesture sent another wave of murmurs through the audience. "I didn't come here to fight," Norris said, his voice quiet, yet somehow carrying through the arena without the need for amplification. It was the first time he had spoken publicly all evening, and the simple statement carried weight precisely because of that restraint. "Not asking for a fight?" Wallace replied quickly, spreading his arms in a gesture of innocence. "Just a friendly demonstration. Your roundhouse against mine. Let the people see which one's better." He turned to the crowd. "That's fair, right?" The audience response was mixed, eager cheers from those hungry for confrontation, uncertain murmurs from others who sensed the undercurrent of tension. Norris took another step toward the ring, then stopped again. "Martial arts isn't about better, Bill. It's about discipline, respect." Each word was measured, controlled. Wallace's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Sure. All that traditional stuff. Very important." He bounced lightly on his feet, his energy a deliberate contrast to Norris's stillness. "But we're entertainers too, right? These people paid good money to see the best." He gestured to the crowd. "Don't you think they deserve to see if that famous roundhouse still works?" The veteran fighters in the front row exchanged glances. Dave Hebler shook his head slightly. "He doesn't know who he's poking," he muttered. The announcer, sensing both opportunity and danger, stepped between them. "Ladies and gentlemen, what a moment this could be. 2 different styles, 2 different generations, 2 different speeds." Wallace interjected, drawing more laughter. "Look, Chuck. No disrespect, but things have changed since your day. It's about speed now. Precision. That old roundhouse of yours might have worked when fighters were slower, but against today's competition?" He shook his head with exaggerated sympathy. "It's a dinosaur. Impressive for its time, but extinct." A heavy silence fell over the arena. Even those who had been cheering seemed to recognize that a line had been crossed. The announcer's smile became fixed, his eyes darting between the 2 men as he tried to gauge how to proceed. Norris stood perfectly still, absorbing the words. When he finally spoke, his voice remained even. A true martial artist doesn't need to tear others down to stand tall. Wallace's expression shifted, something like genuine irritation flickering across his features. "I'm not tearing anything down. I'm stating facts. Your roundhouse is slow, outdated. Anyone with eyes can see that." He turned to the crowd. "Am I right?" Some cheers rose in response, but they were scattered, uncertain. The mood had shifted from excitement to discomfort. Even Wallace's most enthusiastic supporters seemed to sense they were witnessing something that had moved beyond entertainment. "You know what?" Wallace continued, his voice hardening. "Forget the demonstration. Let's settle this right now." He pointed directly at Norris. "Your roundhouse against mine. One kick. Let these people see which one lands first." The announcer stepped forward quickly. "Now, gentlemen, this is an exhibition, not a competition." "Scared, Chuck?" Wallace interrupted again, louder this time. "Worried your legacy might take a hit? Or maybe those movie contracts have made you soft?" In the front row, Dave Hebler stood up, his face flushed with anger. "That's enough," he called out. "Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." But Norris raised his hand again, silencing his friend without looking away from Wallace. The gesture was small, but carried unmistakable authority. Hebler sat back down reluctantly, exchanging glances with the other veterans. Norris took a deep breath, held it for a moment, then released it slowly. With deliberate calm, he began rolling up his sleeves, methodically folding the black fabric to his elbows. The simple action drew the eye of every person in the arena. There was something magnetic about his economy of movement, the absolute precision with which he prepared himself. Wallace watched, his expression a mixture of triumph and uncertainty. He had achieved what he wanted. Norris was coming into the ring, but something about the older man's composure made him shift his weight unconsciously from one foot to the other. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer said, his voice hushed with anticipation, "it appears Chuck Norris has accepted the challenge. This is completely unplanned, completely unexpected, a once-in-a-lifetime moment." Norris finished with his sleeves and stepped onto the ring steps. The crowd fell silent again as he ducked between the ropes, his movements fluid despite his age. He stood opposite Wallace, hands at his sides, eyes steady. "Before we begin," the announcer interjected, trying to regain control of the situation, "let's remember, this is an exhibition. A demonstration of skill, not a demonstration is fine," Wallace said, cutting him off. "One roundhouse each. Let's see which one lands first. Which one has more power?" He turned to the crowd. "What do you say, Vegas? Want to see whose kick is better?" The audience responded with renewed enthusiasm, the earlier discomfort temporarily forgotten in the prospect of witnessing something historic. Camera flashes intensified, capturing the two men standing mere feet apart. Wallace bouncing lightly on his toes, Norris absolutely still. "I've been watching you all night, Chuck," Wallace said, his voice carrying easily in the suddenly hushed arena. "Sitting there, so quiet, so judgmental." His tone hardened. "You think you're better than this, don't you? Better than entertaining these people? Better than me?" Norris said nothing, his expression unchanged. Wallace's smile tightened further. "You know what your problem is? You're living in the past, clinging to old techniques, old ideas." He circled slightly, gesturing to the crowd. "Meanwhile, I'm giving these people what they want. Speed, excitement, something worth remembering." "A true fighter," Norris finally responded, his voice low but clear, "doesn't need to announce himself. His skill does that for him." Something flickered in Wallace's eyes, a flash of genuine anger breaking through the performative confidence. "Let's test that theory," he said, setting his stance. "On 3. We both throw our roundhouse. Let's see whose lands first." The announcer, recognizing he had lost control of the situation, stepped back reluctantly. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we're about to witness a direct comparison of two legendary techniques." Wallace bounced on his toes, shaking out his arms, putting on a show of loosening up. Norris remained motionless, his breathing steady, his focus absolute. 1, Wallace called out, raising his finger dramatically. The crowd echoed him. 1, 2. Wallace's voice rose higher, his body coiling with tension. 2. The arena shook with the collective shout. Wallace paused, letting the tension build, his eyes locked on Norris. 3. The word had barely left his mouth when he exploded into motion, his left leg whipping upward with blinding speed. But Norris, who had not moved, had not even seemed to breathe differently, was already countering, not with a roundhouse, but with a simple sidestep. Wallace's kick sliced through empty air, where Norris had been standing a split second before. The momentum carried him forward, off balance, eyes widening with surprise. Norris stood just beyond his reach, unmoved, watching him with the same steady gaze. What the? Wallace caught himself, regaining his balance. That wasn't you were supposed to. A real fight, Norris said quietly, isn't about showing off. It's about control. The crowd had fallen completely silent, 3,000 people collectively holding their breath. Even the announcer seemed at a loss for words, microphone hanging limply at his side. Wallace's face flushed, embarrassment transforming quickly to anger. You tricked me, he said, loud enough for the microphone to catch. That wasn't what we agreed to. We agreed to nothing, Norris replied, his voice still calm. You challenged. I observed. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. In the front row, Dave Hebler leaned toward his companion. And so it begins, he said quietly. Wallace's eyes narrowed. Fine. No rules then. He set his stance again. All pretense of showmanship gone. Let's see what that dinosaur roundhouse of yours can really do. The arena had transformed. What began as an exhibition now crackled with the electric tension of genuine confrontation. Cigarette smoke hung thick in the air, catching in the spotlights that illuminated the two men at the center of the ring. Wallace, flushed and coiled with tension. Norris, still and composed, hands open at his sides. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer said, his voice hushed with the gravity of the moment. It seems we're witnessing something truly unprecedented tonight. Wallace circled slowly, his earlier showmanship replaced by focused intensity. The smile was gone from his face, his eyes hard with determination tinged with the first shadow of doubt. You made your point, he said, voice tight. Very clever. But we both know speed beats power every time. He feinted forward, testing Norris's reaction. That's just physics. Norris didn't respond to the feint. He rotated slightly, maintaining his position relative to Wallace, his breathing unchanged. His eyes, the only part of him that moved with any frequency, remained locked on Wallace's center mass, not his face or his shifting feet. In the front row, the veteran fighters leaned forward, reading the nuances of the confrontation with trained eyes. Dave Hebler nodded slightly, recognizing the stance Norris had adopted, not the flashy competition posture used for points and trophies, but the compact, efficient position developed through years of real combat training. He's not here to perform, Hebler murmured to his companion. He's here to teach. The crowd had fallen into an expectant hush, the earlier hoots and cheers replaced by tense anticipation. Camera flashes had decreased, as even the photographers seemed reluctant to break the spell of the moment. Wallace set his stance again, frustration evident in the tightness of his shoulders. Fine. You want to just stand there? Let's see how that works for you. He launched forward with a rapid-fire combination jab, cross, hook, his fists blurring with speed. Norris slipped the first punch, blocked the second, and deflected the third, with subtle movements that seemed almost effortless. He made no counterattack, no dramatic response. Each defensive motion was minimal, using only the energy required, nothing more. Wallace stepped back, breathing slightly harder. "Not bad for an old-timer," he said, the forced levity in his voice betrayed by the confusion in his eyes. He had expected either to land his punches or to draw Norris into an aggressive exchange. The quiet efficiency of the defense left him momentarily uncertain. The announcer, sensing the need to fill the tense silence, stepped closer to the ring. Incredible defensive technique from Chuck Norris. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're seeing a master class in controlled martial arts." Wallace's jaw tightened at the comment. He rolled his shoulders, recalibrating. "Defense doesn't win fights," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Eventually, you have to actually throw a punch." Norris remained silent, his position unchanged. But those who knew him well, the veterans in the front row, the longtime training partners, recognized the subtle shift in his eyes. He wasn't merely defending now. He was reading Wallace, cataloging his patterns, assessing his weaknesses. Wallace circled again, more cautiously this time. "You know what your problem is, Chuck?" he said, voice carrying in the hushed arena. "You're stuck in the past. All that traditional stuff, honor, discipline, respect." He spat the last word like it tasted bitter. "That's not what fighting's about anymore. It's about who's faster, who's stronger, who gives the crowd what they paid for." He punctuated the statement with a lightning-fast kick aimed at Norris's midsection. Norris pivoted smoothly, catching the kick on his forearm and deflecting it upward, throwing Wallace slightly off balance again. "See?" Wallace said, recovering quickly. "You're playing defense because you know you can't match my speed. That famous roundhouse of yours, it's too slow, too telegraphed." He tapped his temple. "I'd see it coming a mile away." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The challenge was direct now, unmistakable. Even the announcer seemed to recognize that his commentary was superfluous in the face of the tension building in the ring. Norris took a deep breath, held it for a moment, then released it slowly. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly in the hushed arena. "A kick is just a tool," he said. "Like any tool, its value depends on the hand that wields it. Philosophy won't save you here," Wallace retorted, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He had expected anger, had tried to provoke Norris into an emotional response that might make him careless. The continued calm was unsettling. In the front row, Dave Hebler smiled slightly. "He still doesn't get it," he said to his companion. "Chuck isn't fighting, he's teaching." Wallace set his stance again, eyes narrowing. "Enough talk," he said. "Let's see this roundhouse everyone's so impressed by. Unless you're afraid to throw it?" The crowd's attention intensified. Anticipation building, like a physical pressure in the air. This was the moment they had been waiting for, Norris's famous roundhouse against Wallace's taunts. Norris didn't move. His expression remained unchanged, his hands still open at his sides. "What's the matter?" Wallace pressed, gaining confidence from Norris's continued passivity. "Worried it won't live up to the legend? Worried these people will see how slow it really is?" The announcer, unable to contain himself, stepped forward again. "Ladies and gentlemen, the tension in this ring is incredible. Two martial arts legends. Two very different styles. Will Chuck Norris answer the challenge?" Norris's eyes shifted briefly to the announcer, then back to Wallace. Something subtle changed in his stance, not a preparation to attack, but a settling, a grounding. When he spoke again, his voice remained measured. "A true martial artist," he said, "doesn't fight to prove himself to others. He fights only when necessary, and with a clear mind." Wallace's frustration visibly mounted. "Spare me the fortune cookie wisdom," he snapped. These people didn't pay to hear you preach, they paid to see action. He gestured to the crowd. Tell him what you want to see, Vegas. A ragged cheer rose from parts of the audience. But it was uneven, uncertain. The mood had shifted again, the earlier bloodlust tempered by a growing sense that they were witnessing something more complex than a simple clash of egos. See? Wallace said, gesturing to the response. They want to fight, not a philosophy lecture. He set his stance again, more aggressively this time. Last chance, Chuck. Show us this legendary roundhouse, or admit it's all hype. Norris remained still, his breathing steady, his eyes never leaving Wallace. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. Wallace's patience finally snapped. Fine, he said, voice hard. Have it your way. He exploded forward with his signature combination, a feint, a rapid jab, and then his blindingly fast left roundhouse. The kick that had made him famous. The attack was textbook perfect speed, precision, power. It should have landed cleanly or at least forced a dramatic defense. Instead, Norris simply wasn't there when the kick arrived. With economy of movement that seemed almost casual, he had shifted just enough to let the kick pass harmlessly by. Wallace stumbled slightly, caught off guard by the absence of impact. He recovered quickly, turning to face Norris again, confusion giving way to genuine anger. Stop dodging and fight, he demanded, voice rising. Or are you too scared to throw that roundhouse now that people are actually watching? Something shifted in Norris's eyes, not anger, but a kind of clarity. A decision reached. He adjusted his stance slightly, settling his weight. The crowd sensed the change immediately. A hush fell over the arena as thousands of people collectively held their breath. Even Wallace paused, recognizing that something significant had changed in the dynamic between them. You want to see my roundhouse? Norris said. The words, a statement rather than a question. Wallace nodded. Wary now, but committed. That's what I've been saying all night. Let's see if it lives up to the hype. Norris's expression remained calm, but there was new intention in his posture. A kick is just a technique, he said quietly. What matters is the spirit behind it. Wallace rolled his eyes, impatience overriding caution. More fortune cookie. His words cut off abruptly as Norris moved. The movement was so subtle at first that many in the audience missed it. No dramatic wind-up, no showy preparation, just a slight pivot of the hip, a minute shift of weight, and then the kick simply existed where a moment before there had been empty air. Norris's right leg extended in a perfect arc, the roundhouse materializing with such efficiency of movement that it seemed to defy the normal laws of physics. Wallace had just enough time for his eyes to widen in shock before the kick connected with the side of his body. The impact was audible throughout the arena, not the dramatic crack of breaking boards, but something deeper, more substantial. Wallace folded around the kick, all the breath driven from his body. He staggered backward, legs buckling, only remaining upright through sheer willpower and the desperate grab he made for the ring ropes. The arena erupted gasps, shouts, scattered applause mixed with stunned silence. The announcer stood open-mouthed, microphone forgotten at his side. Norris returned to his neutral stance, hands again open at his sides. His breathing remained steady, his expression unchanged. He had thrown the perfect roundhouse not to hurt, not to humiliate, but to demonstrate, to teach. Wallace clung to the ropes, struggling to regain his breath. His face was flushed with shock, pain, and the first dawning of understanding. He stared at Norris with new eyes, seeing for the first time what had been there all along. How? He managed, the word barely audible. I didn't even see you move. Norris met his gaze directly. You were looking for speed, he said quietly. I showed you efficiency. In the front row, Dave Hebler nodded in satisfaction. Lesson 1, he murmured. The announcer, finally recovering his professional composure, stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice hushed with genuine awe. What we just witnessed was. Words failed him. The arena remained in stunned silence. 3,000 people trying to process what they had just seen. A roundhouse kick delivered with such perfect economy of movement that it had seemed to materialize rather than develop. Wallace straightened slowly. One hand still pressed against his side where the kick had landed. The arrogance had drained from his face, replaced by something more complex: confusion, respect, and the humbling recognition that he had severely miscalculated. That wasn't, he began, then stopped, reassessing. I've never seen anything like that. Norris inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the comment without pride. There's always more to learn, he said simply. The crowd began to respond now, applause building, scattered cheers growing into a more unified appreciation. They had come expecting entertainment and had instead witnessed something approaching art, martial arts, in its purest form, stripped of showmanship, distilled to its essence. Wallace took a deep breath, wincing slightly at the pain in his side. He straightened his gi, adjusting his belt with hands that weren't quite steady. When he looked up again, his expression had changed, the cockiness replaced by something approaching humility. Again, he said, the word quiet, but clear. Show me again. The arena held its breath as Wallace's request hung in the air. Again, he had said, and the word carried through the hushed space with surprising weight. Show me again. It wasn't a challenge now, it was a request. The shift wasn't lost on the audience, whose earlier bloodlust had transformed into something closer to reverence. They were no longer witnessing a fight, they were observing a master class. Norris studied Wallace for a long moment, reading the change in his demeanor. The younger fighter stood straighter now, his earlier bouncing showmanship replaced by focused attention. One hand remained pressed lightly against his side where the roundhouse had connected, but his eyes were clear, intent. You sure? Norris asked, his voice neutral. Wallace nodded, setting his stance, not the flashy competition posture he'd used earlier, but something more grounded, more authentic. I want to understand, he said, the words clearly costing him something in pride. In the front row, Dave Hebler leaned forward, a slight smile on his face. Now we're getting somewhere, he murmured to his companion. The announcer, sensing the gravity of the moment, stepped back respectfully, leaving the center of the ring to the two martial artists. The spotlight narrowed, focusing solely on them, Wallace waiting with newfound patience, Norris considering the request with careful thought. After a moment, Norris nodded. Watch the hip, not the leg, he said. The kick begins there, not at the foot. Wallace furrowed his brow, processing the instruction. The hip, he repeated, focusing his attention on Norris's midsection rather than his legs. Norris set his stance, the movement almost imperceptible. Ready? Wallace nodded. Eyes intent. Body still. This time, Norris moved with deliberate slowness. Not the full-speed technique he had demonstrated before, but a teaching version. The initial weight shift, the pivot of the hip, the generation of power through the core rather than the leg itself. The roundhouse unfolded in segments, allowing Wallace to see the mechanics that made it so devastatingly effective. The leg is just the delivery system, Norris explained as he completed the motion without contact. The power comes from here. He placed his hand flat against his abdomen, indicating the center of his body, not from the extremities. Wallace watched with rapt attention, professional pride temporarily set aside in favor of genuine curiosity. "Again," he said. "Full speed this time." Norris assessed him for a moment, then nodded. Without warning, he executed the roundhouse at combat speed, the same fluid efficiency, the same economy of movement. The kick stopped just short of Wallace's body, close enough that the younger fighter could feel the displacement of air against his ribs. Wallace's eyes widened, even knowing what to watch for. The speed had surprised him. "I still barely saw the initiation," he admitted, a new respect evident in his voice. In the audience, the mood had transformed. The bloodlust of earlier had given way to hushed appreciation. They were witnessing something rare, not just skill, but the transmission of knowledge from master to student. Even those who had come for spectacle recognized the privilege of the moment. "You telegraph your intentions," Norris said, stepping back to a neutral position. "Your shoulders tense before you kick, your eyes focus on your target. You announce what you're about to do." Wallace absorbed the criticism without the defensiveness he might have shown earlier. "But my speed compensates for that," he said. Though the statement was a question more than an assertion now, against some opponents, "Yes," Norris acknowledged. "But speed alone isn't enough. True mastery comes from efficiency, economy of movement." He gestured for Wallace to set his stance. "Show me your roundhouse." Wallace hesitated only briefly before complying. He set his position, bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, then unleashed his signature left roundhouse, the blindingly fast kick that had made him famous. Norris observed with practiced eyes, noting every nuance of the technique. "Again," he said. "But this time, eliminate the bounce before you kick. It telegraphs your intention." Wallace nodded. Recalibrating, he set his stance again, this time remaining still before launching the roundhouse. The kick was still impressively fast, but without the preparatory motion, it came with less warning. "Better," Norris said simply. The announcer, who had been silent during this exchange, stepped forward cautiously. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice hushed with respect, "we are witnessing something truly extraordinary tonight. 2 generations of martial arts excellence, sharing knowledge in real time." The crowd responded with appreciative applause, recognizing the significance of what they were seeing. In the front row, the veteran fighters nodded in approval, their earlier tension replaced by satisfaction. "One more thing," Norris said, returning his attention to Wallace. "You're focused on the endpoint, the impact. That makes you rush." He demonstrated a slow-motion version of Wallace's kick. "See how your upper body leans forward? It compromises your balance." Wallace watched intently, then nodded. "I've always prioritized speed over form," he admitted. "Speed without control is just wasted energy," Norris replied. "Try again. Focus on maintaining your center." Wallace took a deep breath, centering himself. This time, when he executed the roundhouse, he kept his upper body more aligned, sacrificing a fraction of speed for improved balance and power. "Feel the difference?" Norris asked. Wallace nodded, a look of genuine discovery on his face. "It's more solid, more grounded." He set his stance again, eager to incorporate the adjustment. "Let me try once more." As Wallace continued to refine his technique under Norris's guidance, the dynamic in the ring shifted completely. The earlier confrontation had transformed into collaboration, the challenge into a lesson. Even Wallace's body language had changed, the showy confidence replaced by focused humility. The announcer, recognizing the significance of the moment, stepped forward again. "What we're seeing tonight, folks, is the true spirit of martial arts. Beyond the competition, beyond the entertainment, the passing of knowledge from one generation to the next." In the audience, the shift in energy was palpable. Those who had come expecting blood sport found themselves drawn into something more meaningful, a demonstration of what martial arts was truly about beneath the spectacle and showmanship. Dave Hebler leaned back in his seat, satisfaction evident in his expression. "This is what Chuck does best," he said to his companion. "Turns enemies into students." After several more exchanges, Wallace stepped back, bowing slightly to Norris, a gesture of respect that would have seemed impossible 30 minutes earlier. "I've been doing this wrong for years," he admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. "Focusing on the wrong things." Norris shook his head. "Not wrong. Just incomplete." He adjusted his stance slightly. "Your speed is impressive. Your technique is sound. But martial arts isn't just about what works in demonstrations or competitions. It's about what works when it matters," Wallace finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. The crowd had fallen completely silent now, hanging on every word of the exchange. The announcer, recognizing the moment needed no commentary, stood back respectfully. "One more time," Norris said, setting his stance. "Both of us. Full speed." Wallace nodded, settling into position opposite him. The two men locked eyes, a new understanding passing between them. "On 3, Norris said quietly. 1. They counted together. 2. 3. They moved simultaneously, Norris with his perfect economy of motion, Wallace incorporating the adjustments he had just learned. Their roundhouses executed in perfect synchronicity, stopping just short of contact, the displacement of air audible in the hushed arena. The crowd erupted in applause, not the bloodthirsty cheers of earlier, but genuine appreciation for the display of skill and the spirit of learning they had witnessed. The announcer stepped forward, his voice carrying over the applause. "Ladies and gentlemen, what a privilege we've had tonight. A true demonstration of martial arts excellence." Wallace stepped back, bowing formally to Norris, a gesture of genuine respect now, not the performative deference he had shown earlier. Norris returned the bow, acknowledgement in his eyes. "Thank you," Wallace said, the words simple but sincere. Norris inclined his head slightly. "There's always more to learn," he replied. "For all of us." As the technical exchange between Norris and Wallace concluded, a charged stillness settled over the arena. The crowd's energy had transformed no longer the bloodthirsty anticipation of conflict, but something deeper, more contemplative. Those who had come for spectacle found themselves witnesses to something far more meaningful. The authentic transmission of martial wisdom. Wallace stood at the center of the ring, breathing steadily, his earlier arrogance replaced by focused attention. Sweat darkened his gi around the collar and under the arms, but his posture had changed, more grounded, less performative. Even his eyes carried a different quality, the showman's gleam replaced by genuine curiosity. "I think I understand," he said, voice carrying in the hushed arena. "At least, I'm starting to." Norris nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement without embellishment. He remained centered, his economy of movement extending even to conversation. No wasted words, no unnecessary gestures. The announcer, sensing a natural pause in the exchange, stepped forward cautiously. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his earlier bombast tempered by the gravity of what they were witnessing. "What an extraordinary demonstration of skill and sportsmanship we're seeing tonight." The crowd responded with appreciative applause. But it was different now, not the frenzied excitement of blood sport, but the deeper appreciation of those who recognized they were witnessing something authentic. In the front row, the veteran fighters nodded in approval, exchanging satisfied glances. Wallace took a deep breath, rolling his shoulders as he gathered his thoughts. "But look," he said, addressing both Norris and the crowd. "We still have an exhibition to finish." and I think these good people deserve something special." He turned fully to Norris. "What do you say we give them a real demonstration? Something they won't forget?" Norris considered the suggestion, his expression unchanging. After a moment, he nodded his agreement. A simple gesture that drew another round of applause from the increasingly invested audience. "Outstanding!" the announcer exclaimed, stepping forward with renewed enthusiasm. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we're about to witness something truly unique. A collaborative demonstration by two of America's greatest martial artists." At Wallace's direction, assistants rushed forward with additional equipment. Focus mitts, kicking shields, training weapons. The ring was quickly transformed from a site of confrontation to a space for demonstration. "Let's start with some basics," Wallace suggested, his tone now collaborative rather than competitive. "Show them what real technique looks like. No flash, just fundamentals." For the next 15 minutes, the two men worked through a series of demonstrations that highlighted the core techniques of their respective styles. Wallace showcased his lightning-fast combinations, but with the adjustments Norris had suggested, evident in his form, more grounded, more controlled, less telegraphed. Norris demonstrated the perfect economy of movement that characterized his approach. Each technique executed with precision that drew gasps of appreciation from the crowd. Throughout the exchange, something remarkable happened. Wallace began actively seeking Norris's input, adjusting his techniques based on the older fighter's subtle suggestions. The earlier dynamic of confrontation had been completely inverted. The challenger becoming the student, the challenged becoming the teacher. "Your speed is impressive," Norris commented after Wallace demonstrated a particularly fast combination against the focus mitts. "But notice how your shoulder tenses before you throw the cross. It telegraphs your intention." Wallace nodded, absorbing the observation without defensiveness. "Let me try again," he said, resetting his stance. This time, he executed the combination with greater awareness, minimizing the telltale tension Norris had identified. "Better," Norris said simply. The crowd watched in rapt attention, understanding they were witnessing something beyond the usual exhibition fare, a real-time masterclass in martial arts excellence. As the demonstration continued, Wallace's demeanor changed further. The performative aspects of his personality didn't disappear entirely. He still played to the crowd at moments, still enjoyed their response to particularly impressive techniques. But there was a new authenticity to his approach, a growing appreciation for the substance beneath the style. "Now," Wallace said as they completed a sequence of defensive maneuvers, "I think these people deserve to see something truly special." He turned to the crowd, his showman's instincts returning, but channeled in a different direction. "How many of you have seen concrete breaking demonstrations before?" A scattered response of cheers and raised hands answered him. "Well," Wallace continued, a new idea clearly forming, "breaking boards is one thing, but concrete." He turned to Norris. "That's where we separate the real masters from the rest." Norris met his gaze, understanding the invitation in Wallace's words. Wallace gestured to the assistants at ringside. "Bring out the concrete blocks," he called. "The thick ones, not the exhibition setup." A murmur of anticipation rippled through the crowd as the assistants hurried to comply. Moments later, they returned with several slabs of solid concrete, each approximately 10 inches thick and 16 inches square. These weren't the pre-scored Kyline dried blocks used for guaranteed breaks in typical demonstrations. These were solid construction, grade concrete, intended to challenge even the most skilled practitioners. "Now," Wallace said as the assistants arranged a block on sturdy supports, "breaking concrete isn't just about strength, it's about focus, about technique." He gestured to the imposing slab. One mistake, one slight misalignment of the foot, One moment of hesitation and you're looking at broken toes instead of broken concrete. The crowd's attention intensified, recognizing the elevated stakes. Even those who had been recording the entire exhibition raised their phones higher, ensuring they captured what was about to unfold. "I've broken concrete before," Wallace continued, "but I'll be honest, never blocks this thick, not with clean breaks." He turned to Norris. "But I've heard stories about you, Chuck, about breaks that seemed impossible." In the front row, Dave Hebler smiled slightly, nudging his companion. "Here it comes," he murmured. Norris studied the concrete slab thoughtfully, approaching to examine its composition and placement. He tested the supports with a gentle pressure, ensuring they were stable, then stepped back, assessing distances and angles with practiced eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer interjected, recognizing the building drama, "it appears Chuck Norris is considering an attempt to break solid concrete with his famous roundhouse kick. This is unprecedented in exhibition history." The crowd's response was immediate, and electric gasps, murmurs, scattered applause building in anticipation. Phones rose higher, recording from every angle, no one wanting to miss what might happen next. Wallace stepped back, giving Norris space to prepare. "Take your time," he said quietly. "These aren't your standard demonstration blocks." Norris nodded slightly, acknowledging the comment. He continued his methodical assessment, circling the setup once more before taking position. His focus was absolute, the rest of the arena seemingly fading from his awareness as he centered himself before the challenge. The crowd fell silent. 3,000 people, collectively holding their breath. Even the announcer stepped back, recognizing that no commentary was needed for the moment unfolding before them. Norris set his stance, the same grounded, efficient position he had maintained throughout the evening. There was no theatrical preparation, no dramatic wind-up, no showy displays of flexibility or strength. Just perfect alignment, perfect focus, perfect presence. He drew a single deep breath, held it momentarily, then released it slowly, his eyes never leaving the concrete target. In the front row, Dave Hebler leaned forward slightly. "Watch closely," he whispered to his companion. "Blink, and you'll miss it." The arena had fallen so quiet that the soft sound of Norris's exhalation seemed to carry across the hushed space. Time itself seemed to slow, each second stretching as the crowd waited for the movement they knew was coming. When it came, it happened with such efficiency that many in the audience didn't register the initiation of the technique. One moment Norris was perfectly still. The next, his right leg had already completed its arc, connecting with the concrete in a roundhouse that seemed to materialize rather than develop. The impact was audible throughout the arena, a sharp crack that contained none of the theatrics of exhibition breaks, just the pure sound of focused power meeting solid resistance. For a fraction of a second, nothing seemed to happen. The concrete absorbing the impact without visible effect. Then, with a delayed reaction that made the moment even more dramatic, the concrete split, not a jagged, partial break, but a clean division from edge to edge. The top section slid from the lower half, crashing to the floor with a heavy thud that vibrated through the stunned silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one spoke. The arena held its collective breath, processing what they had just witnessed. Then, like a dam breaking, the response erupted, gasps giving way to thunderous applause, shouts of amazement, people rising to their feet in spontaneous ovation. "Incredible!" the announcer shouted, barely audible over the crowd's reaction. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we just witnessed defies description. Chuck Norris has shattered solid concrete with a single roundhouse kick." But the hyperbole seemed unnecessary. The evidence lay on the floor of the ring, broken concrete that testified more eloquently than any words to the perfection of technique they had just witnessed. Norris returned to neutral stance, his breathing controlled, his expression unchanged. He inspected his foot briefly, flexing it to ensure no damage had been done, then stepped back from the broken concrete without ceremony or celebration. Wallace stood motionless, genuine awe evident on his face. When he finally moved, it was to step forward and pick up a fragment of the shattered concrete, examining it with a mixture of disbelief and dawning understanding. "Perfect contact point," he said, voice barely audible over the continuing applause. "Perfect follow-through." He looked up at Norris, shaking his head slightly. "I've been trying to break concrete like that for years. Never got a clean split." Norris met his gaze directly. "It's not about strength," he said quietly. "It's about focus. About directing all your energy to a single point." Wallace nodded slowly, turning the concrete fragment in his hands. "Not just the technique," he said, understanding dawning in his voice. "The mind behind it. The spirit," Norris corrected gently. The crowd's ovation continued, but in the center of the ring, a more significant moment was unfolding: the transfer of understanding from master to student, the recognition of depth beneath flash, of substance beneath style. "I had you all wrong," Wallace admitted, his voice pitched for Norris alone despite the microphone still clipped to his gi. "All that talk about old and new, slow and fast, I missed the point entirely." Norris acknowledged the admission with a slight nod, neither seeking nor requiring elaboration. The broken concrete spoke for itself, rendering arguments about speed versus power, new versus old, entirely moot. The announcer stepped forward again, struggling to be heard over the continuing ovation. "Ladies and gentlemen, what a privilege we have had tonight. A true display of martial arts excellence that transcends competition, transcends ego, transcends showmanship." But the two men at the center of the ring barely registered his words. They stood in the eye of the storm, the crowd's reaction swirling around them, but something quieter, more profound passing between them. Wallace extended his hand to Norris, genuine respect, replacing the performative deference he had shown earlier. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of sincere gratitude. Norris accepted the handshake, his grip firm but not dominating. "We all have something to learn," he replied. "Always." In that moment, the true knockout was complete. Not a defeat of body, but a transformation of perspective. Wallace had entered the ring convinced of his superiority, certain that flash and speed had rendered the old ways obsolete. He stood now with that certainty shattered as completely as the concrete at his feet, replaced by the humbling recognition that true mastery existed beyond the realm of showmanship. And Norris, who had entered the ring not to prove himself but simply to answer a challenge, had delivered a lesson more powerful than any verbal instruction could have been. Without ego, without animus, he had demonstrated the truth at the heart of martial arts. That respect is not demanded through volume or flash, but earned through consistency, discipline, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing rather than claiming. The crowd continued their standing ovation, but what they were applauding had evolved. They had come expecting entertainment and had received instead enlightenment, a glimpse into the true heart of martial arts, beyond the spectacle, beyond the performance, beyond the noise. Dave Hebler stood with the other veteran fighters, nodding in satisfaction. "And that," he said with quiet certainty, "is the real knockout." The Las Vegas night air carried the cool breath of the desert as the crowd streamed from the arena into the neon-lit streets. Though the exhibition had concluded nearly an hour earlier, the buzz of what had transpired still hummed through the departing audience like electricity. People gathered in clusters under the marquee lights, animatedly recounting what they had witnessed, many still recording videos for friends who wouldn't believe their descriptions without proof. "Did you see that concrete shatter? Like it was nothing. I swear I didn't even see his foot move. Just heard the impact. The way Wallace changed throughout. Man, that was something else entirely. It wasn't just a demonstration. It was like watching someone have their entire worldview flipped inside out. Inside, the cleaning crew moved through the aisles, collecting discarded programs and empty cups, their mundane tasks a sharp contrast to the transcendent moments the space had contained just hours before. The ring stood empty now. Though the memory of what had transpired there lingered like a ghost, not the confrontation everyone had expected, but something far more profound. In the arena's back corridors, away from the departing crowd and the rhythmic sweep of cleaning staff, a different scene unfolded. The stark fluorescent lighting of the hallway, leading to the dressing rooms, cast harsh shadows as Chuck Norris gathered his few belongings, preparing to leave. His movements remained unhurried, methodical, the same economy that characterized his fighting style, evident in even these mundane tasks. He folded his gi with precise movements, smoothing each crease with practiced hands before placing it in his bag. There was a reverence to the action, a respect for the uniform that spoke volumes about his relationship with his art. Unlike many of his contemporaries who had embraced the commercialization of martial arts, Norris maintained the traditional values that had shaped his journey from the beginning. Dave Hebler leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest. The fluorescent light accentuated the lines in his weathered face, evidence of decades spent in dojos and tournament rings. "That was something to see, Chuck," he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Been a while since anyone got that kind of lesson in public." Norris glanced up briefly, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Wasn't trying to teach a lesson," he replied. "Just answering a challenge." "Same thing. In your case," Hebler said with a chuckle. "You know, half the promoters in town are already scrambling to book a rematch. Superfoot versus the Master, or some such nonsense." Norris shook his head slightly. "Not interested." "Figured as much," Hebler replied. "Though I gotta say, the way Wallace looked at the end there, I wouldn't be surprised if he showed up at your dojo someday, looking to learn." Before Norris could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention. Distinct against the background hum of the arena's systems, they carried a measured cadence, someone walking with purpose but without rush. Bill Wallace appeared around the corner, his earlier showmanship replaced by something more subdued. He had changed out of his gi into street clothes, jeans, and a simple polo shirt, but carried himself differently than he had before the exhibition. There was a thoughtfulness to his posture, a weight of reflection that hadn't been there before. He paused at the doorway, suddenly uncertain. His eyes took in the scene, Norris's methodical packing, Hebler's protective stance, before meeting Norris's gaze directly. "Mind if I come in?" The question carried none of the bravado that had characterized his earlier interactions. Norris gestured for him to enter. Hebler straightened, nodded to both men, and tactfully excused himself, closing the door behind him. For a moment, the two martial artists regarded each other in silence, not the charged tension of their earlier confrontation, but a more contemplative quiet. Wallace shifted his weight, searching for the right words. "I've been doing interviews for the past 45 minutes, he finally said, running a hand through his still damp hair. "Sports Illustrated, Martial Arts Weekly, local press. Everyone asking the same questions about what happened out there." He gestured vaguely toward the arena. "I didn't have good answers." Norris continued his methodical packing, giving Wallace space to find his way to what he really wanted to say. "I want to apologize," Wallace continued, meeting Norris's gaze directly. "What I did out there, the way I called you out, the things I said about your technique." He shook his head. It was disrespectful, completely out of line. Norris paused in his movements, studying Wallace with the same focused attention he brought to everything. "Why did you do it?" he asked, simply. The question was direct, but not accusatory, a genuine inquiry rather than a demand for accountability. Wallace blinked, caught off guard by its simplicity. He began, then paused, genuinely reflecting. "I guess I wanted to prove something. To the crowd. To myself." A rueful smile crossed his face. "To you, most of all." "What were you trying to prove?" Norris asked, his tone not condemning but curious. Wallace exhaled slowly, the question forcing him to examine motivations he had perhaps avoided confronting directly. "That I was better," he admitted finally. "That my way, the new way, was superior to the traditional approach you represent." He gestured vaguely toward the arena. "I've built my whole career on being faster, more dynamic, more entertaining than the old guard. On pushing boundaries, breaking with tradition." He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had executed thousands of strikes, that had broken countless boards, that had earned him championships and fame. "My whole identity has been wrapped up in being the evolution of martial arts," he continued, voice quieter now. "The next step. Faster, flashier, more audience-friendly." He looked up, meeting Norris's steady gaze. "And you represented everything I thought I had moved beyond." Norris nodded, acknowledging the honesty of the response without judgment. "And now?" he asked. Wallace's expression shifted, a complexity of emotions playing across features usually animated by confident showmanship. "Now I realize I've been missing something fundamental," he said quietly. "I've been focused on the wrong things. On looking impressive rather than being effective. On entertaining rather than mastering." He flexed his fingers thoughtfully. "When you threw that roundhouse, the one I didn't even see coming, it was like everything I thought I knew got rearranged in an instant." Norris remained silent, allowing Wallace to work through his thoughts. "I've built my reputation on speed," Wallace continued. "On being Superfoot. On kicks so fast, they're just a blur. But your roundhouse." He shook his head, still processing. "I never even saw it initiate. Just felt the impact. That's not just speed, that's something else entirely." "Economy of movement," Norris said simply. "No wasted energy, no telegraph." "That concrete break," Wallace said, shaking his head in renewed disbelief. "I've attempted that exact break 100 times. Never got a clean split like you did. Always assumed it was about generating more power, more speed." "It's not about more," Norris said. "It's about better. About focusing what you already have." Wallace nodded slowly. "That's what I've been missing." He looked up, meeting Norris's gaze again. "I came here tonight thinking I was at the peak of my game. Thought I had nothing left to learn." A self-deprecating smile crossed his face. "Turns out I was just getting started." Outside in the corridor, voices and footsteps indicated the press had located their dressing room. A knock at the door was followed by the announcer's enthusiastic voice. "Chuck? Bill? The reporters are clamoring for interviews. This exhibition is all anyone's talking about. The wire services are waiting, and ABC Sports wants comments for their late broadcast." Wallace looked to Norris, a question in his eyes. Norris considered for a moment, then shook his head slightly. "Tell them, we'll catch up later," Wallace called through the door. "We're in the middle of something important." The surprise in the announcer's response was evident. But Entertainment Tonight is here. Sports Illustrated. This is major publicity. Career-making stuff." "Later," Wallace repeated firmly. The footsteps eventually receded, accompanied by the announcer's apologetic murmurs to the disappointed press. Wallace turned back to Norris. "A few hours ago, I would have been first out that door, soaking up every second of camera time," he admitted. "Would have been planning the merchandising tie-ins before the first question was asked." Norris nodded, understanding. "Fame is seductive," he said. "But ultimately, empty, if it's not built on something real." "Something real," Wallace repeated, considering the phrase. "That's exactly it. Out there tonight, when you broke that concrete, that was real. Not performed for the cameras, not exaggerated for effect, just pure skill, applied perfectly." He shook his head slightly. "I've been chasing the wrong kind of recognition." Norris finished packing his bag, closing it with the same deliberate care he brought to everything. "It's never too late to redirect your path," he said. "You have genuine talent, genuine skill. The question is what you choose to do with it going forward." Wallace absorbed this, nodding slowly. "I'd like to learn more," he said finally. "About your approach, your philosophy." The admission clearly cost him something in pride, but the humility in his voice was genuine. "If you're willing to teach, I'm willing to listen." A subtle change passed over Norris's expression. Not quite a smile, but a warming of the eyes, an acknowledgement of the significance of Wallace's request. "The dojo's in Torrance," he said simply. "Tuesday mornings, 6 a.m. Wallace blinked, then laughed a genuine sound of surprise and appreciation. "6 a.m. You don't mess around, do you?" "Never have," Norris replied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. As they prepared to leave, Wallace paused, another thought occurring to him. The press will want a story. They'll want to know what happened tonight. How to explain? He gestured vaguely, searching for words to describe the transformation that had occurred in the ring. Norris considered this, then spoke with characteristic economy. "Tell them they witnessed the true spirit of martial arts," he said. "Not a battle between opponents, but a journey from confrontation to respect." Wallace nodded slowly, absorbing the wisdom of the response. "I came looking for a fight," he said thoughtfully, "and instead found a teacher." "And I," Norris replied, "found a student worth teaching." They exited together, walking side by side down the corridor toward the rear exit, away from the waiting press and lingering crowds. Their footsteps echoed in synchronized rhythm. Two martial artists from different generations, different philosophies, now walking a shared path. Outside, the Las Vegas night embraced them with desert stillness. Stars pierced the darkness above the neon glow of the Strip, unchanging witnesses to the timeless cycle of challenge, learning, and growth that had unfolded beneath them. In the parking lot, they paused, preparing to go their separate ways. Wallace extended his hand once more. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of genuine gratitude. Norris accepted the handshake, his grip firm and steady. "Tuesday," he reminded him. 6 a.m. Wallace grinned. "I'll be there." He turned to go, then paused, looking back. "One more question." Norris waited expectantly. "That roundhouse," Wallace said, shaking his head in lingering disbelief. "How long did it take you to perfect it?" Norris considered the question, his expression thoughtful. "I'm still working on it," he replied. Wallace stared at him for a moment, then laughed a sound of genuine discovery. "That's the lesson, isn't it? It's never finished, never perfect. The journey is the destination," Norris confirmed. "Always more to learn, always room to grow." As they parted ways beneath the vast desert sky, the neon lights of Las Vegas continued their garish dance, unchanged by the events of the evening. Tourists still crowded the sidewalks. Gamblers still hunched over tables. The city's perpetual rhythm continuing uninterrupted. But for the two men walking away from the arena, and for the thousands who had witnessed what transpired inside it, something fundamental had shifted. The next morning, the sports pages would carry the headlines, "Norris stuns Superfoot in surprise showdown." Exhibition turns to education, as martial arts legends meet, the kick heard round the world. Photos would show the moment of the concrete break, Wallace's expression of amazement, the two fighters side by side in a moment of mutual respect. But these surface accounts would miss the deeper truth of what had transpired, the internal transformation that had unfolded in that ring. They would capture the events, but not the essence. The what, but not the why. Because in a city built on spectacle and showmanship, they had glimpsed something authentic, a reminder that true mastery isn't about who shouts loudest or moves fastest, but about the quiet discipline of continuous improvement. About respecting the journey. About understanding that strength lies not in dominating others, but in mastering oneself. In the days that followed, Wallace would field countless interview requests, would be offered exhibition matches and sponsorship deals based on his newfound connection to Norris. Many in his position would have leveraged the moment for maximum publicity, would have spun the narrative to maintain their image of invincibility. But something had changed in Bill "Superfoot" Wallace. The cameras that showed up at his next training session captured a different fighter, more focused, less performative. When asked about the exhibition, he answered with an uncharacteristic directness. "I went in thinking I knew everything," he told the gathered reporters. "I came out realizing I've barely scratched the surface." And the following Tuesday, as the first light of dawn broke over Torrance, California, a car pulled into the parking lot of a modest dojo tucked between a hardware store and a laundromat. Bill Wallace stepped out, gym bag over his shoulder, arrived 15 minutes early for his first lesson. Inside, Chuck Norris was already there. The smooth wooden floor freshly swept, the simple space ready for the day's training. No cameras, no crowd, no announcer, just two martial artists and the eternal pursuit of mastery. "You're early," Norris observed. Wallace nodded. "Figured I had a lot of catching up to do." As they began the morning's training, starting with the most basic of stances, the most fundamental of movements, the lesson of that Las Vegas night continued to unfold. A lesson not just about martial arts, but about life itself. That true strength comes not from dominating others, but from the humility to recognize one's limitations. That wisdom begins not with certainty, but with the courage to say, "I don't know, but I'm willing to learn." And perhaps most importantly, they embodied the truth at the heart of all martial arts, that the greatest victories aren't won against opponents, but against one's own limitations, one's own ego, one's own preconceptions about what is possible. The path of mastery, they both understood now, wasn't a straight line to a fixed destination, but a circle that continually returned to the same fundamental truths, yet with deeper understanding each time around. Not a ladder to be climbed, but a wheel to be turned roundhouse after perfect roundhouse. Day after patient day. Year after dedicated year. The journey itself was the destination, and in that journey, both men, teacher and student, master and novice, each in their own way found something more valuable than any trophy, more lasting than any headline, more real than any momentary fame. The quiet satisfaction of taking one more step on an endless path. The humble recognition that perfection is never reached, only approached. And the profound understanding that in the end, it is not the final destination that matters, but how we walk the path along the way. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.